Welcome back, everybody. I'm Zach Reinhardt. We're doing number 10 through number 1 of my top 20 Japanese albums. I assume you guys watched the number 20 through 11 video, but if not, that's fine. You know, this is 10 through 1. It's the most hype part. I can't blame you. So, welcome, and we'll get started right away with number 10. Nisen Mondai's new album, E. That's like the letter E. Nisen Mondai is a strange, experimental, avant-garde, I guess you could call it like post-rock group. They use a combination of live instrumentation and electronics to make some really out there, kind of whacked out soundscapes that are really slow, somewhat minimalist, and have a like really consistent rhythm. They have a drummer who kind of hits away at that hi hat and stamps on that kick drum in time, and the rest of the kind of sounds and textures kind of morph around this really steady rhythm that carries a song through. Nisen Mondai is a really great band. They have some really awesome stuff if you're into this kind of weird soundscape stuff. But this album in particular, they had another album that came out earlier this year, but this album in particular, E, shows Nisen Mondai really exploring some territory that they haven't explored in the past. They're really expanding their kind of sound palette here. There's a little bit more noise and kind of electronics here. There's still the drums, but some of the other live instrumentation has been eschewed in exchange for just more strange, like morphing electronics and sounds. There's some abrasive kind of noise stuff as well on here, though it's not really loud and harsh or anything like that, but it's definitely present. And I just really like to see that Nisen Mondai is still evolving their sound and still kind of changing and putting out some really solid kind of hypnotic songs. If you can handle the really weird and the really kind of avant-garde stuff, this is definitely worth a listen, as well as the rest of Nisen Mondai's discography. They're pretty good. And number 9 is the new Emerald 4 album, I Want to Be a Saint. Emerald 4 makes some really slow, smooth, indie-tronic stuff. Listening to Emerald 4 feels like syrup or molasses is coming out of your speakers or your headphones. It's just so thick with texture and like synthesizers, and it's just so slow and kind of relaxed. Viscous is definitely a word you can use to describe Emerald 4's music, but none of that takes away from how poppy and catchy and like fun their songs are. This album is just comprised of some really nice, easy to listen to, poppy, but still experimental and weird, like indie-tronic synthesizer stuff with some female vocals as well. And it's just a really pleasant listen. There's a lot of texture to it. There's a lot of kind of morphing electronics. The synths are all really just like thick. And the recording is somewhat lo-fi. And I feel like that's intentional. It's a kind of an aesthetic choice. And it works out really well. Everything feels really warm and sweet. And it just, you just feel cozy with this album. And I believe it's free, so, you have no excuse not to give this thing a listen. And moving on, we have Mojo by Narcolepsyn at number 8. This thing came out on Headache Sounds, which is one of my favorite record labels, and is the reason I paid attention to it. And fuck, man, it's just so weird and abrasive, and it doesn't like you, it doesn't like the listener, but it's also like kind of fun and like almost danceable at times. It's really upbeat and fast, um, but also just so fucking strange. The frontman, who sings, plays guitar, and plays saxophone in the band, makes some just really cluttered, dense, just like hard to figure out parts for himself. There's some just really out there stuff he does, but it's all upbeat and punky, and it's fast, it's in your face, and his vocals, man, they sound like he's like dying or something. If you've by chance heard the band Oshiri Pen Pens, they have a similar kind of vocal aesthetic to Narcolepsyn. And man, this thing is just post-punk weirdness at its finest. It's really great. Like it's experimental, it's dense, it's cluttered, it's lo-fi, it's fast, it's in your face, and it's just confounding as to how anybody could make an album that sounds like this. But shifting moods very drastically, we have number 7, Pre-Dawn, with her new album, Absence. Pre-Dawn is the alias of singer-songwriter Shimizu Miwako. And on this album, she comes forth with some really soft, relaxed, kind of warm and quaint indie folk and indie rock that is just really kind of beautiful. And there's some really great lyrics on here, and some very like beautiful performances as well. There's a really great flute solo on the song Sigh, and her voice is really soft and kind of sweet. And this album just feels like being kind of wrapped up in a really warm blanket on a cold night. There's some really great acoustic guitar on here. Miwako has really expanded her sound quite a bit on this album. There's a lot more like additional instrumentation. There's some horns, some woodwinds, and she plays just about all of it except for there's a flute player who's brought in on the song Sigh that I mentioned, and I don't think she plays the drums, but everything else is her. And it's just a really warm, pretty album. And there's not really a huge amount more I can say than that. The album is just really pleasant and soft, and this album sounds like a pleasant warmth feels. But then, moving on, we have Clan Eileen with their new self-titled album, Clan Eileen. On this album, Clan Eileen explore some kind of really expansive and somewhat psychedelic territory within the context of traditional Japanese contemporary post-punk. They're a big fan of really kind of spacey, slow instrumentals that kind of build into something that has a lot more energy and is a lot more aggressive. The first 3 songs kind of exemplify that build pretty perfectly. There's some really spacey, kind of expansive, pretty moments of low energy on here. And there's also some really exhilarating, like pedal to the metal, kind of really high energy punk stuff on here as well. The songs on here are all really solidly written, and the structure of this album is like perfect. It's like a case study of how to structure an album like this. The kind of rising and falling tension of this album is really something to admire when you kind of take a step back and look at the album as a whole piece. The only real problem here is this thing has some production issues for how expansive and kind of wide and ethereal they're trying to be at times. The production just isn't quite there. It's a bit too lo-fi for that. But if you're looking for just a really solid post-punk record, look no further. And we're in the home stretch, people. With number 5, it's the Natsu Yasumi Band with Fantasia. This album really caught me off guard earlier this year. I was not expecting to enjoy it as thoroughly as I did. But this thing is a really compelling and interesting, but still very accessible collection of kind of poppy songs that are all very smooth and have a somewhat mellow aesthetic to them. They have a lot of keyboards that are like electronic keys that are really kind of wide and soft, and they use like pan steel drums a bit as well, and they incorporate like some trumpet in there, and there's a lot of kind of changing instrumentation overall. And while this thing is really well produced and there's some great performances on here, what's most impressive about this album is the songwriting. There's some really kind of inventive transitions in a lot of these songs and a lot of really cool like instrumental parts. None of these songs are just some bare bones, simple pop song with just some instrumentation thrown on there. I've talked about in the review ornamentation. That's what really sets this album apart. There's constantly some additional aspect being added to the song aside from the very kind of base set of instruments that is just always making the songs a little more colorful, a little more charismatic, have a little bit more character. And it's just used so well throughout this album. And it's really just an example of somebody using that really super clean production style to great effect, because with having all that kind of really clear, clean production, you can really fit in a lot more like instrumentation and have a lot more going on without the song feeling like super cluttered and dense. And these songs are just some really slick, well done, well produced pop tracks. Moving on to number 4, we have Tokume Kibo with Fuseru Nawanai. This thing is just a really exhilarating punk and post-punk album, though it's so much kind of more than that in the genres it references. There's a track on here that I almost feel like it's almost doom metal. It's so kind of slow and heavy and distorted, but there are also these fast, punchy, in-your-face songs that just fly by and leave the whole room destroyed as they pass by. They have a female singer, and she does some of the most just shrill screaming that I've heard in a band in a while. I love her vocal performance, and I of course mean shrill in the best way possible. And in addition to being really well performed, having some really great just guitar tones and such, they also have really great interesting songwriting. There's a lot of cool parts. They're not afraid to experiment a bit and, you know, get a little left field of what's typical in their genre. And they do this all with just a ton of confidence and a ton of energy, and it's just a ton of fun as a result. Highly recommend this album, but we can't stay on it long because we're moving right on to number 3. It's the new Shugo Tokumaru album, Toss. This thing is awesome. Shugo Tokumaru is a worldwide renowned singer-songwriter who puts together just some really great, eclectic, somewhat folky pop music. Greg Sonyer from Deerhoof does the drums on this thing, so you know the drums are great. And Shugo employs an incredibly diverse arrangement of instrumentation all over this thing. There's even a track done with a full chamber orchestra. These songs are joyous and bright and happy and kind of bombastic and explosive, but he also has songs that are soft and melancholy as well. There's some really great kind of finger-picked acoustic guitar on here, and there's some ballads as well. And he is not afraid to experiment with production as well. This thing is incredibly eclectic, yet very cohesive. Really awesome, fun, experimental pop record that's really worthy of all of the acclaim that his back catalog has accrued over the years. But number two, and man, it was a hard choice choosing between Shugo Tokumaru and this album for number two, but I think I'm going to go with Loop Rider's new album, Ascension. This album firmly cemented Loop Rider in the list of favorite bands in Japan right now. This thing is dark, it's loud, it's abrasive, it's brooding and somewhat disturbed. It draws influence from heavy, kind of stoner, sludgy doom metal like Boris, and also hardcore punk along the lines of Minor Threat and Fugazi. And then on top of that, there's this big blanket of Japanoise along the lines of Incapacitants or Merzbow. This thing hits you with auditory sandpaper from the very beginning and doesn't let you get comfortable until the thing's over. This is harsh, it's loud and abrasive, it's wonderful. The drums on here are great, the guitars are great. I mean, what else would you expect from a Loop Rider record? It was for a very long time my album of the year. That is, until my number one record, Limited Express Has Gone's All Ages came around. Limited Express Has Gone is a veteran Kansai area punk band that is really kind of leading the charge in the fast-paced, loud, intricate punk music with yelpy female vocals kind of subgenre. This thing is just pure, unrestrained energy that just pummels you from front to back. But it's not unrefined. There's been a lot put into the songwriting. There's intricate rhythms, there's a lot of kind of off-kilter melodies, and all the instruments really kind of play off of each other in very interesting ways. Yukari's vocals are yelpy, loud, high-pitched, but she's not afraid to get melodic and softer at times when she needs to be. There are moments of just incoherent noise and yelling and just chaos, but they also contrast that with some really clear, soaring melodies, like on the song Meteo Daydream, which has this moment of gang vocals that feels like orchestral in its kind of epicness when you compare it with the chaos that surrounds it. This album operates on a very instinctual level, a very primal kind of energy, but it also has a lot of like kind of cerebral moments as well, and a lot of kind of refinement that you can put a lot of thought into and really dissect. There's a lot of interesting just musical ideas being expressed here, but that doesn't give up any of the kind of raw energy and emotion that would normally be conveyed in a punk album. There is nothing to complain about on this record at all. It is just a ton of energy from front to back. I don't know how they do a live show. They must be just fucking exhausted by the end of it. But that's it. Number one, Limited Express Has Gone. It's all ages. It's a really great album. And really everything else on this list is a pretty great album as well. Before I go, I do want to mention that there are a couple albums that were kind of pseudo-Japanese that I really enjoyed but did not want to include. The new Quero Quero Bonito album, Bonito Generation, is a really great, colorful electronic pop album that is like infectious. I absolutely love this thing, and it probably would have been somewhere pretty high in my top 10, but they're an English band and they have a, I think, half Japanese front woman who does sing in Japanese. There's a fair amount of Japanese on the record, but you know, it's not a Japanese album. It's not from Japan. So I felt a little weird putting it on there. And it's pretty much the same deal with the new Ken Kobayashi record. He's just British, you know? Like I can't do it. Can't handle it, man. make all your music in London, like, can't put you on the list. But it's a really great kind of dreamy, somewhat eclectic indie pop, indie folk album. Also, I put out some music this year that I'd like to, just mention real quick. I put out an album called Boring at the very beginning of this year. I think it was like January 2nd or 3rd or something. And, I'm pretty proud of that one. And I also put out on H&M Records a EP called Inveigh, which both of which are available on my Bandcamp, link in the description. And also, if you're interested in Japanese music, you might find it worth your time to follow me on Twitter. I'm at Aimborla, Aimborla. It's on the screen probably, unless I was really lazy. And that's it. Enough self-promotion, enough honorable mentions. Peace. I'll see you next week for a review. We'll be back on the normal schedule.